Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'm tonight's host. And I know I usually start off the show with something a little bit on the lighthearted side, but tonight I have to diverge from that a little bit because a good friend of mine, Rich Odell, who's been my real estate assistant for about 20 years, has been battling cancer for more than 10 years with the chemotherapy and radiation, passed away Saturday night. And I want to not just give a shout out to Rich and to his family, but also want to mention that he was the kind of person that, suffering as he was with the chemotherapy and radiation, he always had a terrific attitude and never complained about the pain he was going through, and was always there to boost everybody else's spirits. And I guess that's how he helped boost his own spirits through that tough decade plus. But he had an expression about what he was going through that I'd like to share with you. He said that you really can't buy time, not with the chemotherapy and radiation, but you really can't buy time in this life. You're really only leasing it. And apropos, of course, for real estate, but also I think for the philosophy of life in general. Just wanted to mention that. But tonight I've got a good friend, Ken Gucker, on, and Ken ran for the state senate against Mike McLaughlin in last year, 2016. And I'm going to let Ken talk about what brought him to that point in time, and a little bit about its background in the auto field. And Ken, go ahead. Tell everybody who you are and what brought you to where we are today.
Well, I've kind of raised in the area. I grew up in the town of New Fairfield. I've lived in Danbury for the last going on 30 years this Halloween. I mean, bought my house on Halloween of all places, and when I moved in, it was a little scary, but first time house, and we're still there, so it's great.
Yeah.
My degree is in graphic design. I've had numerous jobs in the city as far as different things dealing with both engineering and graphics, and but my passion was always in automotive. I do restorations on old Cougars and Mustangs. If you remember the old Mercury Cougar.
Oh yeah.
Those are the vehicles that I specialize in. I'm a national judge, and I'm pretty much known for that. But the reason why I became, such a progressive activist was things happening in my own neighborhood, in my own town that I felt were not good. Mm-hmm. And that's usually what brings a lot of people forward into stepping up. It's when it becomes personal to them, and it's when they see something that say, hey, you know what, we need to stand up. So, and in that particular case, it had to do with land use issues, it had to do with quality of life issues, it had to do with land use issues. Overdevelopment issues, environmental protection issues, things of that sort. And picking up my first clipboard, like President Obama said on his way out the door, if you're not happy, go pick up a clipboard, go get some signatures, and get out and hit those doors. Well, we did that, 20-something years ago, and it's grown into stepping into more and more things. Land use issues. Immigration issues, fighting against 287G, fighting against the parade ordinances, fighting against a lot of what downtown Danbury has pushed to go forward with as far as not being really good for the entire community, standing up for tax issues.
It's an immigrant community.
Exactly.
Danbury, of all places, anywhere in the world, anywhere in America, this city is built on immigration. Mm-hmm. Going back to the Portuguese in the 1950s, the Southeast Asians, 1970s, and more recently folks from Central and South America that have made this city and this country a great place.
Absolutely, and and being that we have such a diverse community, it's our schools are quite diverse. I think it's 42 languages spoke at Danbury High School, mm-hmm. the largest high school in the state of Connecticut. Yep. And one that is growing rather than shrinking. So there is a bright future, but sometimes many things get kind of forgotten. And a lot of people, unfortunately, as going from door to door, dealing with people, they don't really see what's going on in front of them because they're busy. You know, they work 2 jobs trying to survive. They come home, they turn on the news, they try to feed their family, they feed their kids, they watch maybe 20 minutes of news, they go to bed, and they get back up the next morning, and they're doing, you know, the same thing all over again. So it's almost up to us and up to the community to step up and inform our neighbors of what's going on and be out there in the community and be out there trying to inform them. Not try to sway them, but just try to inform them.
Carry on a conversation.
Exactly.
Engage people in a conversation.
Exactly.
That's what we've been doing here for almost 8 years, and we've had a lot of folks on that have very different viewpoints on issues than I do, and yet you always can find some point of agreement and work to make the world a better place.
Yep.
By means of working together and finding solutions.
Absolutely. In fact, I remember the first day I met you.
Okay, I probably don't, but go ahead.
There was this little-known guy by the name of Ned Lamont.
Oh, that's right,
Who had just gotten the endorsement of DEA, I think.
Democracy for America, yeah.
And it was an event held down in New Haven at the Omni Hotel.
Yes.
And Ned accepted his endorsement, made walks around the room. And that's where we first met. But that was really the catalyst for getting into politics.
Yeah.
Was watching, you know, somebody stand up against somebody who they thought was unbeatable, that had supposedly such a great approval rating.
Yeah.
But he wasn't listening to his populace and his people.
Yeah, and of course in that case we know it was Joe Lieberman, and
Yep.
we had a show once along the way. I think it was during the great Affordable Care Act debate when Lieberman basically said if anything of a public option or anything approaching Medicare was attached to it, that Lieberman would filibuster the Senate, and it would stop it, even though he was part of a Democratic Party 60 vote. Well, it was 59 votes in Joe Lieberman.
Yeah.
And we did a show with the empty chair Joe Lieberman, because we had Lynn Tabersack and I and James Root had to lecture the empty chair on what that particular individual was doing wrong. So Ned Lamont fought an incredible battle against Joe Lieberman, beat him in the primary, and by almost a quirk of timing, ended up, Lieberman was able to, he had just enough time, knowing he was losing the primary, to get out and get signatures and get on the ballot as a third-party candidate. Some Connecticut for Lieberman candidate.
Connecticut for Lieberman
party, yeah.
But what was never brought up about the Connecticut for Lieberman party was that party actually never existed.
It never did exist, yeah.
You know, so there's always been questions as to the legitimacy of, did that happen or not? But what it did do,
Yeah.
and like you see going on, is even though Ned wasn't successful in the end,
Yeah.
it did bring a lot of people out of the woodwork to start working together on causes. So it wasn't a loss. You know, if it wasn't for people like Ned running, he paved the way for Chris Murphy getting. If you remember, he was running the first time for the House of Representatives.
Yep, against Nancy,
against Nancy Johnson.
Yep.
And it opened a door for him to be able to follow some of the points that were being brought up. You know, and going forward, it's been good as well. I mean, it has gotten more progressive groups together, has gotten people to not be afraid of going out and doing some hard work for a good cause. You know, so it's, you know, in fact, I was with Ned this Saturday. He's volunteering at Central Connecticut State University. He did a talk up in Winsted, Connecticut on fake news and wars, and it was extremely informational. But it's good to see that he's still out there trying to get people warmed up to the idea of getting involved and showing that, hey, a loss doesn't necessarily mean a loss.
And Ned followed behind another close, good and dear friend, Howard Dean, because Dean's campaign was built on the concept of hope, not fear.
Yes.
Working on hope rather than being afraid of what dangers lay ahead. the notion that hope could carry us through. And Ned's tagline ended up being, "Hope is greater than fear." Well, actually, that's what you're here for, because just the same way that Ned Lamont encouraged a lot of other folks to move forward, even though he was not successful in the sense of winning his election. That's exactly what you're here for. That's your goal. That's my goal for you. Let's put it that way. So tell us about your campaign, the good and the bad of it, what you've taken from that, and then see if we can motivate some folks going forward for this year and next year.
Well, my campaign, as you said in the introduction, I ran against probably one of the most hated individuals in the Senate, Michael McLaughlin. His viewpoints are not in the mainstream of what his constituents would like to see. He is far, far, far to the right, but he's also often absent on his own agenda. That being said, just like I had when I volunteered for Ned Lamont, saying I've had enough, it was one of those aha moments. I've had enough. I've had enough of not being heard. I've had enough of the wishes and things that I hear from people in the street, and I hear in Danbury, and also in New Fairfield, where I grew up, where my parents still live. So I get to hear all this stuff coming from there as well. Their frustrations. I felt, well, I've always been raised that if you've got a problem with something, stand up, do something about it.
What are some of the things that, some of the stances and some of the statements that Mike McLaughlin has represented and has made? What are some of the things that separate him from mainstream Connecticut and mainstream Danbury area thinking?
That would probably take a encyclopedia of lists, but
I'll start with the word birther.
I was going to just say that the birther bill that he was trying to push through, the Senate up in Hartford. Whatever your viewpoints are, the president was elected. The election was over. This is a fringed push for something that had no basis. And it does not represent Connecticut. And my problem with that view, plus a bunch of other views, was their time up in Hartford is so limited. Why are you spending what limited time we have on things that are going to go nowhere, things that are absolute waste of time?
And even his own party basically told him to shut up.
It was an embarrassment, But it's the birther bill. It's his choice on pro-life or pro-choice. He goes over and above. Connecticut is a very progressive state. To push, like right now, he's got 3 abortion bills under different guises of things, trying to push them through the Senate. My understanding is they've been pretty much squashed. But meanwhile, during the campaign, he didn't talk about the birther issues. He didn't talk about the abortion issues. He talked about how we need to get our fiscal house back in order. But you're introducing these bills that are doing nothing more than just wasting resources.
Yeah, does it help the economy if with this bill, wasting time on it?
One of the biggest things I was hearing out of New Fairfield, they call him, photo op Mike. He shows up for a photo op, and he's gone. But when there are issues or when there's problems or questions, he's nowhere to be found. These are the things that I was hearing that I was like, what, we need to get involved. We need to really make a good run at this, and we did.
So on the campaign trail, look, I had Rahab Ali Brennan on twice, once before the election and once after the election. And after the election, we talked about, it was a look back, because Rahab was not successful. He came very close to beating Mike Duff. But he had some wonderful recollections of instances, of conversations he had, doing his door-to-door. Share some of those that you had with us.
Well, one of the things that we did do differently this year as a party than has ever done in the past is we actually started coordinating our campaigns. And we started working together as a team because, as you know, many hands help as opposed to people pulling in different directions.
Yep.
And that's always been a problem with just about any campaign. But knocking on doors and having people sheepishly opening the doors, but then once you start talking to them, they're happy. I finally have somebody to talk to finally maybe get some straight answers, maybe get some information. I mean, there was one woman, I mean, it was really sad. She was losing everything. Mm-hmm. And there were no resources to help her.
Meaning
her husband got sick.
In her home and
her home, they were going to be going into foreclosure. I mean, she was in tears. She says, I have no idea, where do I go? What do I do? You know, and a lot of what we did and what I did was got on my cell phone right at that moment, started calling people mm-hmm. like Lynn Tabersack and other people who are more versed in these areas. Started calling organizations that I knew, got her information, said I said, I will call you back tonight with a list of things to do. You know, so it was not only just helping, you know, people, but also getting out there and talking. You learn a lot about a neighborhood when you walk. I mean, a lot of people think they know a lot about their neighborhoods. They really don't unless they go out and actually start talking to people and knock on doors. And just because what happens in your neighborhood doesn't mean that's what's happening in the neighborhood across the street or the one downtown or some of these other issues. So it's very eye-opening. I'll tell you what, go knock on doors. You'll learn more in one weekend than you will reading the News Times.
Well, I did it back.
That's not hard to do.
I did it back in 2008, and I ran for the House of Representatives, State House of Representatives, against a fellow by the name of Dave Scribner, who, for the most part of his time in office, had no Democratic Party opponent. But that's another story in Brookfield. But I'm pointing over my good and dear friend Henry Pietras, who's part of the Brookfield Democratic Town Committee and doing a great job to turn that town committee around and move it forward. But again, like you're mentioning, you get to meet some people, and for the most part, they're saying, "Oh my God, somebody's actually here talking to me that's actually running for office," because they probably never heard or had an opportunity to talk face to face to somebody that's in an office or looking to be in an office.
Well, they don't know where to go. It's not like these resources are easily to get a hold of. They're not sure who to turn to. They do have questions and problems. And also sometimes when you knock on their door, it also sparks a memory and maybe a story that they did read, or maybe they heard the tail end of a story and they weren't sure how those things came about, like some of the good things that happened in the city and why and how they happened. So only a couple times do you get somebody to either slam a door in your face, or come out with some totally far-off conspiracy that there is nothing you're going to say that's going to, and you just be respectful, you smile. Absolutely. I did have one gentleman that I knocked on his door, and he was a registered Republican, which it doesn't matter. My argument has always been, when I've gone to a door like that, and they say, well, I'm a Republican. And I say, well, does that mean that your opinion and your voice doesn't matter? Does that mean I shouldn't be talking to you? But I knocked on his door, I'm talking with him, and he says, Mike's a friend of mine. I said, well, okay. So then I, being a team player, started talking up about Jeff Tomchek, who was running in the 138th, because that's my district and where I was at the time. Talked about Jeff and his great qualities and such, and figured at least we'll get somebody. We'll at least try to get a Democrat in there somewhere. Since obviously I assumed, which you know what they say about assuming, I assumed that this gentleman...
That's why I use the word presumed instead of assumed.
Exactly. That this gentleman was going the other way, and as I shook his hand to say goodbye, he says, no, I didn't say I was going to vote for him. I said he was my friend. Can I have your literature? Can I ask you some questions?
Nice.
And I saw him when we were poll standing, and he gave me the thumbs up and smiled and shook my hand. So, it works.
People can be amazingly, never presume that, again, don't presume that people aren't open-minded because of anything about them, anything outwardly visual about them or anything they say, because people are a lot smarter than they're generally given credit for. They have, they're a lot more open-minded if you have an opportunity to work with them.
Well, unfortunately, as we've seen recently in the press and other places, this idea of a hostile media, and it's actually not the media, but it is the politics that are going on, and it's causing people to split to where people aren't talking. So they assume, or presume, I should say.
Thank you.
Presume that the person you're speaking to, because they might be a Democrat or a Republican, that you don't have a chance, or you shouldn't even be bothering to talk to them, which isn't the case. And nothing spells that out more than, for example, when we were fighting some of the land use issues in Danbury, which affects everybody.
Talk about some of those.
Well, the biggest one was the Cotswold decision, which has been beaten to death in the page. We've been fighting that for 15 years. That's 78 acres of land that is behind the high school. It traverses between Clapboard Ridge and Padenham Road. It's been a troubled spot for about 30 years. It was tried to be developed, it failed. They tried to do it again, it failed.
What are the issues there? What are there environmental issues at play there?
There's a lot of environmental issues. There's environmental issues as far as inland wetlands issues. In fact, Capitola Brook flows into there, which goes into the Padenham Brook.
Yep.
That's the brook that, when the police station went underwater, that's the brook that feeds it. People don't realize how long and how far back many of these tributaries go. Actually, Padenham Brook gets its water almost all the way into New Fairfield, up into the Route 39 corridor of New Fairfield towards the Ball Pond area, and off of King Street and all of that, because water flows downhill.
Yeah.
But there was environmental issues as far as flooding, as far as washouts, as far as the steep terrain. You have some gradations of about 40–50% grades that were going to require 20-foot retaining walls to hold these projects up. It was not fitting into the well-being of the neighborhoods. You have single-family housing on 1-acre lots, and you were going to put in this high-density cluster development. And then lastly, the traffic that would be exiting this project would all be coming out by that lovely light next to Danbury High School. That already has a traffic problem as it is.
And it is a serious problem, with especially times of day when you've got the school buses going in and out.
Yes.
And they've accommodated for that to some degree, with the buses taking a different alternate route in and out. But still, it's a lot of traffic.
There's a lot of traffic with, believe it or not, with parents who park on those roads to pick up their kids. There are kids on Field Road where now kids are crossing the street of 39, Clapboard Ridge and 39, to get over to their parents, which is causing some problems because there's no light there. The light is down a little more, I think, on Beckerly. But now you have to stop traffic again. You have on Eastgate Road, which is the road that the high school empties out onto, you've got people parking there, and it specifically says no parking. That jams up the road. And then, of course, as I always say, traffic follows the path of least resistance, just like water. They scoot out the back way to try to escape.
People driving will try to find a way around whatever they have to do in order to save a couple of minutes.
Absolutely.
Especially with kids crossing the road. And of course, kids, especially high school kids, probably think they're invincible. That nothing's going to.
Did you think you were invincible?
Yes.
Sometimes we still think that now, and then we wind up with pulled muscles and other things that 30 years ago would have been nothing.
Maybe not quite as much as at least as I did when I was a teenager. But you think that nothing can happen to you, and that's why high school age kids are in such danger. So we're going to wrap up our first show pretty soon, and we'll go on, and we're going to come back about some other things. But any other narrative from the campaign trail? Any other interesting conversations?
There was a ton of them. I mean, there's just a lot of people, again, wanting to be heard, feeling a voice. There wasn't a lot of kind words for my opponent. They were happy that somebody was coming forward. And unfortunately, a lot of what people were focusing on, which we couldn't really address, was the national election as that was going through, because no matter what party people were with, they were frustrated on both sides.
We say on Progressive Soup, and have said it quite a bit, 2 worst candidates ever. But what specific issues did people ask you or want to talk about the most locally?
Locally, it had to do with the quality of our schools. If you lived around the lake, especially in New Fairfield and such, the lake is a big issue. They had record amounts of closings due to the algae blooms and because of the milfoil problems that have persisted to happen there, which has moreover to do with the owners of the lake rather than the stewards of the lake.
Yeah.
Issues with just the way downtown Danbury is being handled. You know, traffic issues, overdevelopment issues. A lot of people were scratching their head over that lovely Kennedy place that has popped up. You know, what's that going to bring?
Yeah.
And people were upset over victimizing groups such as the homeless shelter being under attack by the, or not even, the shelter itself being under attack, but then also how many minority communities are concerned and we're worried about where things were going, and this fear and hate that seems to be permeating everywhere we go.
What's up with that? I mean, is it because is it that because a certain segment of the population, all of which probably voted for Mike McLaughlin, is it because they're louder than other people are? Is it because, I don't know.
I think moreover is because of inexperience in dealing with. I mean, many people who may have those fears, the immigrant communities that I went to, because we knocked on a lot of immigrant community doors. We talked to a lot of Spanish communities, and we talked to Hindu communities and Muslim communities and such about what they needed and wanted, and they were very happy to feel like they're not getting that voice up in Hartford with our current representation, so they were happy to hear the ideas that I had going forward.
Okay, we're going to come back and do a second show, and that'll be on tomorrow, Thursday at noon 30. And we'll continue the discussion. David Stevenson, Ken Gucker, my esteemed guest. Thank you very much for joining. We'll see you tomorrow at noon 30. Have a good evening.